let's start just simply with the economics. It looks like the Senate is going to pass another tranche of the payroll protection program to keep small businesses, keep people on the payrolls. Yet we see week after week of millions of jobs lost. How insufficient, in your view, or has it been insufficient, the fiscal response we've seen from D.C.?
Oh, I think the response has been two things. It's way insufficient on several fronts, and it's bottlenecked. The money isn't really flowing. So I'm very disappointed in this deal because there's no state and local fiscal relief, and that's a gigantic hole that's opening up. And it's obvious. Everyone knows it's there, and it's going to be a real impediment to economic recovery because states and local governments are going to be forced into severe austerity. So there's nothing there. The PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, it's all been spoken for, but it looks like a lot of the money went to the wrong people. It didn't go to the small businesses. And unemployment benefits, which are actually, I think, the most important piece of all of this, given what's happening to the job market, is we have all these states. It's been being run through the states, which I think is a big mistake, and they just can't handle the load. So our fiscal response. It could have been worse, but that's in America. Things can always be worse. But it's looking like we're falling really way short of the challenge here.
So we all know what a big fan of the New York Times President Trump is, and I'm sure he reads your columns regularly. If he were to call you in and ask you to sort of design the ideal program to keep the economy afloat during this period of widespread shelter in place, what would be the ideal design?
Okay. We should, first of all, we need to unbottleneck those unemployment benefits. The Canadians just set up a special federal program. They're federal, not ours, with a portal and a hotline, and Canadians who needed COVID-related unemployment benefits were getting it within days, $2,000 a month, quickly. We could still do that. The second thing is we need several $100 billion in aid to state and local governments because they're on the front lines of dealing with this. And then the business lending is, conceptually we've got pieces of all the right elements in our program, but we just don't have. We either just don't have the administrative capacity, or we just haven't allocated enough money. So, but I would have said state and local and a federalization of the unemployment benefits would be the most important things right now.
Let's switch it over to the Fed side. The Fed has moved extremely rapidly by Fed standards, building on tools that were developed during the last crisis, even expanding them. And you mentioned state and local, actually setting up a municipal lending facility. What grade would you give Jerome Powell, and then what further do you think is within the Fed's potential toolkit to further ameliorate this crisis?
No, I think I give Powell an A. I mean, I don't. The Fed has actually. They've gone. Very extreme. I mean, they took, I think, the right point of view, which is that there may be some loans some purchases that we'll regret later, but we'll regret not stabilizing the financial system a whole lot more. So they took all the risks on the upside of doing too much. So no, the Fed. I mean, there was a point there a few weeks back when it really was looking like 2008. You could see that liquidity was drying up and markets were starting to freeze, and the Fed just threw an incredible amount of money, trillions of dollars at it, which was the right thing to do. So no, the one thing that we at least appear to have avoided is a financial sector crisis fallout from this. Everything else is kind of going to hell, and because we're not getting money out the door fast enough, but the Fed is getting its kind of money out the door fast enough.
Would you like to see, I mean, you mentioned a couple of times already the need for more aid for city and states, and maybe that will come from Congress in a later round. Do you think the Fed could do more on the muni side than what it's done and expand that facility so that it can further ease the austerity that we're already seeing across the country?
Not too much. The problem is the constraint on state and local is not that they can't sell bonds, because the Fed has actually moved to stabilize. It's the fact that they're basically not allowed to sell bonds. I mean, they can to some extent for financing, but state and local governments are under constitutional rules. I think 49 and 50 states have constitutional rules requiring a balanced budget. Most cities are under rules. They probably could borrow. I mean, if they weren't under those rules, since everybody is fairly sure that this is a temporary shock, they probably could do some borrowing, but they themselves are not allowed to. So this is outside.
Right.
I have leftist friends who say, why doesn't the Fed just give people lots of money? And the trouble is that's not in the Fed's remit, and that includes state and local governments. It can't just give states money. It can free up their borrowing, but the trouble is that the states are not allowed to do large-scale borrowing. So this is not the Fed's job. This is Congress's job.
Paul, obviously, so much of the country has been under de facto lockdown for several weeks, and we see various state governors sort of getting ready to go and talking about opening up. From an economics perspective, I mean, nobody thinks we're going to wait until there are absolutely zero cases or zero risks. That doesn't seem realistic. How should governors or the White House think about the trade-offs from the sort of pure virus side versus the cost, the economic degradation that we see day after day of staying under lockdown?
Okay, the thing to say is, first of all, we're a rich country. The present discounted value of our future GDP is, effectively infinite. So we can afford to provide disaster relief to ourselves for a long time. The debt is not a problem. The costs of a premature loosening up in terms of life and death are just huge. I mean, we are just the numbers are. How many people does an affected person in turn infect? And you need to get R below 1, which it is. Maybe in New York, I think nationally it's probably still above 1. You need to get it below 1 for a long enough time so that the pool of people who are still infected is small enough that a much ramped up testing program gives you other ways to contain it. And if you don't do that, if you start to open up when we are still have a lot of people out there and don't remotely have the testing capacity, then you're looking at a second wave of deaths. I mean, we've seen that happen in a couple of places. We've seen that happen in places like Singapore, and the costs of that are immense. So this is where you really want to err on the side of caution. This is I think, even in purely economic terms, this is the idea that now is the time to open is crazy.